Hi everyone, do you guys know that there are two types of assets in this world, which are tangible asset and intangible asset? Last week we already learned about tangible asset, but how about intangible asset? We will be helping you to embrace everything about intangible asset. This slide is basically the structure of our presentation for today. Take a look at the very left box in this slide. Intangible asset is identifiable because it must either be separable from its company or it arises from contractual or legal right from which we expect economic benefit will flow from it. Second element, a non-monetary asset. Since monetary asset got a value from the right to receive cash or cash equivalent in the future, intangible asset does not have this element. Therefore, intangible asset is a non-monetary asset. Third element, it has no physical substance. We are gonna move on to the second part of this presentation, which is the types of intangible assets that can be found in the industries. Number 1, patent. As you guys can read in the white box, patent is an exclusive right granted for an invention, which is a process or product that provides a new way of solving a problem. The keywords here are exclusive right, invention, product or process, and new way. Remember that. At the first picture, we can clearly see that FGV Holdings Berhad, a company coming from agriculture industry, they have patented their technology on producing a high quality of graphene. Meanwhile, at the right side of this slide, we can see that Farmaniaga Berhad, a company from healthcare providers, they have patented their stevia formula. I've mentioned few of industries that are always related with patents. So first, at the first petal, we have agriculture industry. Next, on the third petal, we have electric and electronic. Moving on to license, which will be our second type of intangible asset. And let's see which industry got licensed the most. License is a permit to use public facility from a government. There are many types of license, but we choose lending rights and also broadcasting license. Referring to the second box, lending right is a right that was given by a state regulatory authority to an airline operator to lend in the state's respective airports. AirAsia got the right to lend in Amalan airports, and the right was granted by Australia to one and only airlines from Malaysia, so that is considered as an intangible asset for AirAsia. Please focus only on the highlighted ones. So as retrieved from AirAsia's statement of financial position, we can see that the lending rights position is below the non-current asset and inside the notes 16 for intangible asset. Now we are talking about the second type of license, which is broadcasting license. It is a type of spectrum license that gives a licensee permission to use a portion of radio frequency for broadcasting purpose. This type of intangible asset is always can be found in telecommunication industries. MCMC has granted broadcasting license to 4 companies apart from Mesat Broadcast Sdn Berhad, which is a subsidiary for Astro Malaysia, in order to combat monopoly. Now, let's learn the third type of intangible asset, which is copyright. So, copyright is a right that protects creative works. This right is given to art performer, author, song composer, and also artists. These are types of works that are eligible for copyright. I'm just stating the examples. You can always read more on the sources that I've stated in the slide. Now let's focus on the right part of this slide. It states that whoever who use any copyrighted works without the consent or authorization of that owner, it may constitute an infringement under Copyright Act 1987. Aisha will be explaining more on types of intangible assets that can be found in the industries after this.
Thank you, Hazira, for finally let me speak. Hi everyone, my name is Aisha and I will expose you guys to more examples of intangible asset that we continuously study and search for you guys. So, this is the fourth example of intangible asset, which is franchise. This is an agreement where the franchisor gives the franchisee the rights to sell their products or services. When a franchisee pays a franchise fee to the franchisor, this payment can be considered as intangible asset. For more understanding, let's take a look on this annual report of Pelangi Publishing Group Berhad. As we can see from the slides beside me, they have franchise license fee under their intangible asset. How can they have it as intangible asset? Proceed to the next slide to know about it. Actually, there is a long list of its subsidiaries, but let's just focus on these companies. Pelangi Publishing Group Berhad gives the right to sell their products to Pelangi Education Sendirian Berhad as franchise education operator. They publish and distribute books and other education materials and also provide education training related services. Next example is trademark. Trademark is a legal right to exclusively use symbol, name, phrase, or logo. The flower above me is the 5 functions of trademark, which is choice, origin, quality, marketing, and economy. While besides me is the importance of trademark registration, which trademark owners can take legal action or lodge a complaint if anyone use it without consent. And registering trademark will give the owners an evidence for trademark ownership. And the 3 things at upper above is non-registerable trademark. For real example, Panasonic Holdings Berhad have a trademark under their intangible asset. The trademark relates to the Cornell brand name that was acquired in a business combination in 2006, where Panasonic acquired Amtech Marketing Services Sendirian Berhad that owns the Cornell brand from USA. Let's move with the 6th example of intangible asset, which is goodwill. As we know, goodwill is an intangible asset that arises from a business combination, and the amount of goodwill is the purchase price minus the fair value of company's net asset. For this example, we refer to Astro as it has goodwill under their intangible asset that arises from a business combination. For the 7th example of intangible asset is research and development. Research cost is the cost of searching for a new product or services. Development cost is the cost that incurred after the search is ended and before the formal production of the products. There will be 2 phases, which is research phase and the development phase. On research phase, the expenditure on research should be recognized as an expense when it is incurred. But for development phase, if the development fulfill all 6 criteria in the timeline above me, all costs during this phase can be capitalized as intangible asset. Finally, the last example of intangible asset is computer software. Computer software can be intangible asset and can be tangible asset depending on what type of software. If the software is integrated with the hardware, it is recognized as PPE under tangible asset. One of the example is operating system. It is integral part of the computers and the computer can't run without this operating software. So it is tangible asset since it is not separable. But if it is separable, such as accounting software, which it is not needed for the computer to run, it means it is under intangible asset. Separable means it can be sold, can be transferred, and can be licensed. We have checked the annual report of Maxis, Paksen, DG, Astro, and 7E, and all these companies have computer software as their intangible asset. So this is the annual report of 7E, which shows that they have computer software under their intangible asset. So we have shared with you guys an example of intangible asset. That's all from me. Thank you. Atira, I think it's your turn to guide our friend.
Aisha, that's me. Thank you. Assalamualaikum and hi everyone. Now, let's get into the recognition and measurement of intangible asset. An intangible asset shall be recognized if and only if it fulfills these four criteria. The first one is the cost can be measured reliably. The entity has control over the asset. The asset is expected to attribute future economic benefits that will flow into the entity, and the asset must be identifiable. Identifiable in this context means that the asset must be separable from the entity and or it arises from legal or contractual rights. There are 5 methods of acquiring intangible assets, which are through separate acquisitions, exchange of assets, internally generated intangible assets, acquisition by way of a government grant, and acquisition as part of a business combination. And there are 2 stages of measurement, which are the initial measurement and the subsequent measurement. All intangible assets shall be measured initially at cost. Now let me explain about the 5 methods of acquisition I mentioned earlier. In separate acquisition, the price an entity pays reflects the expectations of the expected future economic benefits that will flow into the entity. This means that the entity expects there to be an inflow of economic benefits, even if there is uncertainty about the timing or the amount of inflow. Plus, the cost can be measured reliably, so it fulfills the criteria for it to be recognized. Next, through exchange of assets, one or more intangible asset may be acquired in exchange for a combination of monetary and non-monetary assets. The cost of such asset is measured at fair value of the asset acquired. If the asset is not measured at fair value, then the cost is measured at the carrying amount of asset given up. It is sometimes difficult to assess whether an internally generated intangible asset qualifies for recognition because there are 2 problems. First one being whether there is an identifiable asset that will generate expected future economic benefits, and to determine the cost of the asset reliably. To assess whether an internally generated intangible asset meets the criteria for recognition, an entity classifies the asset into 2 categories or 2 phases, which is a research phase and a development phase. I believe my teammate Aisha has explained about the 6 criteria an asset arise from development should meet for it to be recognized, so I will not explain any further about that. Next up is the acquisition by way of a government grant, where the asset may be acquired free of charge or for nominal consideration when the government transfers the rights to the asset to another entity. And an asset acquired as part of a business combination is measured at cost, that is the asset's fair value at the date of the acquisition. Please allow me to explain about an example I provided about acquiring an intangible asset by way of a government grant. So in 2015, Saipark Resources Berhad's subsidiary, also known as Saipark Smart Technologies Sdn Berhad, going forward as CST, entered a concession agreement with the Ministry of Housing and Local Government. The government awarded CST the rights to undertake the design, construction, maintenance, operation and management of smart WTE system for a period of 25 years. As at 31st October 2019, the project is still in construction, so no amortization takes place. The value of the asset is now 848 million ringgit, and the calculation is that the fair value plus expenditures attributable to preparing the asset, and we get the net carrying amount. Now I will explain about the example of intangible asset acquired in a business combination. So the company chosen is Micron Steel Berhad. This group carries an intangible asset related to licenses, patents and trademarks after acquiring it from Steel Tube subsidiary. The group's intangible asset now has a carrying amount of 20 million ringgit, and these assets, which are the licenses, patents and trademarks, have indefinite useful life, means that they are not subject to periodic amortization, and a 5-year cash flow has been performed, so the entity expects there to be a future economic benefits that will flow into this entity.
Okay, I will pass this presentation to the next person. On to you, Azira.
Thank you, Adira. Hi everyone, I'm Azira, and now I will continue to present about the measurement after recognition for the intangible asset. According to MFRS 138 para 72, an entity may choose either these two accounting policies options, which are the cost model or the reversion model. Both models are measured subsequently in a similar way as property, plant and equipment with accordance to MFRS 116 that was presented by Mind the Gap last week. Okay, now let's see the difference between the cost model and the reversion model. For cost model, the formula used is cost minus accumulated amortization minus accumulated impairment loss if any, while for the reversion model, the formula used is fair value minus subsequent accumulated amortization minus subsequent accumulated impairment loss if any. Second, for the cost model, it is measured at cost to acquire the intangible asset. Therefore, the cost will remain the same. While for the revaluation model, it is measured at fair value by a reference of an active market. What is an active market? An active market is a market in which the items traded are homogeneous and there are willing buyers and willing sellers that can be found anytime, and the price are available to the public. Hence, the fair value will be changed every time after the revaluation. Third, under this cost model, the class is not affected. Meanwhile, for the revaluation model, the entire class has to be revalued. For example, Company A has 3 licenses, but they only wish to revalue only 1 license. For this scenario, revaluation model is not applicable. Why? Because in order to use this revaluation model, you need to revalue all those 3 licenses. And that is what is meant by the entire class needs to be revalued. Lastly, as the cost model is measured at the cost to acquire the intangible asset, then it is only carried out once. While for the revaluation model, it needs to be carried out at regular intervals. Once the revaluation model is chosen, the revaluations need to keep up to date at each reporting period so that there is no material difference between the carrying amount and the fair value. But it does not necessarily mean that we need to perform reversion every year. Normally, the policy will state that it needs to be revalued within 3 to 5 years. So, the frequency depends upon the changes in the fair value of the intangible asset items being revalued. However, between these two models, most of the company will choose to apply the cost model for the intangible asset. This is because in order to use revaluation model, the main criteria is that we need to measure fair value by a reference of an active market. Still remember the definition that I mentioned earlier? So, for intangible asset, an active market cannot exist. The model used in the subsequent measurement can be found in the annual report at the significant accounting policy. Let's see the real example practices. For the first example is the AirAsia Group Berhad that is in the industry of transportation. AirAsia Group Berhad has classified their intangible assets into 2, which are the goodwill and also other intangible assets. Both of these classes are measured using the cost model and disclosed as shown on the red line at the significant accounting policies. The second example on Pharma Niaga Berhad that is in the industry of pharmaceuticals, you guys can refer in our slides. Now, let's move on to the next part of the presentation, which are the amortization and its useful life. Amortization is simply equivalent to the depreciation, but there is one specific aspect of amortization in intangible asset, and it is the useful life. The accounting for an intangible asset is based on its useful life. there are two types of useful life that are finite useful life and indefinite useful life. For finite useful life, it has to be amortized, while for the indefinite useful life, you don't have to amortize it at all. There are three methods of amortization, which are the straight line method. This one is the default method. The second one is the diminishing balance method, and last is the unit of production method. When it comes to the intangible asset that has finite useful life, we should assume the residual value to be zero, unless first, there is an active market, second, it is probable that such market will exist by at the end of the useful life of the intangible asset, and the third one is that there is a commitment by the third party to purchase the intangible asset by the end of the useful life. Now, let's take a look on the difference between the finite useful life and indefinite useful life. First difference is in terms of the definition. Finite useful life is defined as the limited period of benefit to the entity, while the indefinite useful life is defined as there is no foreseeable limit to the period over which the asset is expected to generate the net cash flow. Second, for finite useful life, it has to be amortized, while for indefinite useful life, we don't have to amortize it at all. Third, for finite useful life, we need to consider for impairment when there is an indication that the asset has been impaired. Meanwhile, for indefinite useful life, we need to test for impairment annually and whenever there is an indication of the asset has been impaired. If you guys are curious about the impairment of intangible asset, don't worry, it will be discussed by Arfan after this. For finite useful life, we have to review the amortization at the end of each financial period. By this means, we need to review both the amortization period and also the amortization method. Meanwhile, for indefinite useful life, as it has no amortization, then we will review the useful life at each financial year so that we can check if there is any factors that indicate the indefinite useful life to be changed to finite useful life. Moving on to the next slide, according to MFRS 138 para 94, the useful life of an intangible asset may arise from contractual or other legal rights. The useful life that arises from the contractual or other legal rights should not exceed the period of the contracts but may be shorter. Second, if it is conveyed in a limited term that it can be renewed, then the useful life must be included in the renewal periods. Third, there is evidence to support without any significant cost. Now, let's see the real practice example. For example 1, this can be found in the annual report of AirAsia Group Berhad at the significant accounting policy, which the goodwill of the AirAsia is not amortized and also will be tested annually for impairment and whenever there is indication that the asset has been impaired. Next is under other intangible asset, there is research and development, which is the internally developed software by AirAsia. It states that it will be amortized once it is ready for use on a straight line basis. Therefore, this indicates that it is the finite useful life. Also, under other intangible asset, AirAsia has the lending rights, which states that the lending rights are expected to be renewed yearly, subjected to several terms. As there is no evidence of non-renewal, then the useful life of the lending rights is indefinite. Okay, now based on the presentation in the notes to the financial statements, it is proven that for intangible asset that has indefinite useful life, there is no figure in the red box, while the intangible asset with finite useful life, there will be figure for amortization as it will be amortized yearly. Okay, now I would like to pass this presentation to Arfan.
Thank you, Azira. Hi, my name is Arfan, and we have now reached the last part of our presentation for intangible assets, which are impairment test, retirement, and disposal of the intangible assets. How an intangible asset shall be tested for impairment? First of all, I will explain on how to do the test of impairment. Impairment test formula is by deducting the carrying amount from the recoverable amount of the asset. The end result of the testing will be recorded as impairment loss when the carrying amount is greater than recoverable amount. The flowchart given will show you three different routes on how should an intangible asset tested for impairment. There are three different colors of arrow as you can see, and each one will represent one process of how intangible asset tested for impairment. The first arrow is the one with soft pink color, which is intangible asset with indefinite useful life. As stated by Azira before, asset with indefinite useful life shall not be undergoing amortization. This asset will be tested annually for impairment whenever there is indication of impairment, as well as the useful life of the asset will be reviewed to see whether it's still fulfilling the characteristic of intangible asset with indefinite useful life. If the review of useful life shows changes of characteristics of the indefinite useful life to finite useful life, we will go to the flow with the red arrow in the chart. As you can see, the asset with indefinite useful life have changed to finite useful life as the review shows that the asset have not obeyed the indefinite useful life characteristics. Hence, the asset shall be impaired. The last flow in the chart is the arrow with beige color, which is intangible asset with finite useful life. Asset with finite useful life will be amortized and will not be tested for impairment. Here is an example of how company record the impairment loss in their notes to financial statement. As you can see, we picked this example from Pharmaniaga, and you can focus on the blue box below. There is impairment loss recorded under goodwill, as goodwill is an intangible asset with indefinite useful life. Now, I'm going to explain on retirement of intangible asset, which we can also say as de-recognition of intangible asset. There are two reasons on how a company will de-recognize an intangible asset, which are first, disposal through sale, and second, no future economic benefit from its use or disposal. For disposal by sale, a company will incur gain or loss by selling their intangible asset. Gain or loss will be calculated by deducting the carrying amount of the asset from its disposal price if there's any. The amount calculated will be recorded in profit and loss, not revenue, unless MFRS 16 require otherwise on sale or leaseback. Date recorded for disposal is when recipient, which is the buyer, obtain control over the asset with performance obligated satisfied in MFRS 15. Lastly, the carrying amount of reissued right of business combination to any third party will determine the gain and loss of the reissued. Now, we have reached the end of our presentation, and I will help you all in wrapping up all the key points for this topic. First, we are going to talk about the characteristic, which is identifiable, non-physical, and non-monetary asset. Next, we are going to talk about how to acquire an intangible asset. There are various ways on acquiring it, which is separately, second, business combination, third, exchange asset, fourth, by government grant, and fifth, internally generated. And we will go to how to measure the intangible asset. There are two ways, which is first, cost model, which is measured by cost, and second is revaluation model, which is measured at fair value. The next key point is amortization, which only applies to finite useful life intangible asset. Amortization expenses will reflect the consumption of intangible asset. Amortization also will be done under straight line approach. And next, we're going to talk about the impairment test, which apply to indefinite useful life and also apply to indefinite useful life that change to finite useful life with annual review and indicator. Last but not least, we're going to talk about the de-recognition, which is disposal and no future economic benefit For disposal, it will be recognized in profit and loss. That's all from us on the presentation of intangible asset. Thank you.